emails for two years now.
As well. I don't know this one. Am I relevant? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Hi, my name is Danny.
Have you got the mic turned on? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, all right. Need to hold it a little closer.
Yeah, my name is Danny. I graduated from LCC last year, and part of my work was this thing called Majority World Diasporas, or like a subset of that, which is Majority World Diaspora Histories, which is a series of lectures that I've kind of been doing, kind of around accurate and humane representation. So Majority World is a term that's been coined to replace terms like ethnic minorities, the global south, stuff that have kind of like negative connotations. So yeah, this will be one of the lectures that I'll be giving. So I'm going to start with this quote from Stuart Hall, which talks about language as a medium that we make sense of it, and in some ways a kind of like technology that people kind of use to make sense of the world. And language can refer to spoken language, it can refer to like signs, systems, all of that. So the term majority world was coined by a photographer, and yeah, it's again used to replace stuff like the developing world. And here are some lectures that I've done on it. I've done 3 since, 2 at LCC and 1 in Bournemouth Uni. If you wanted to watch one of them, you can scan that. But yeah, I'll just go straight into it. So this is a map of the majority world. And as you can see, it's kind of more than just the global south. And interestingly enough, the 2 countries like right at the bottom of the earth, Australia and New Zealand, aren't included on that. So I think it's very interesting that the term the global south only really refers to the non-white countries. So it's like geographically inaccurate, and it just connotes, you know, being subordinate and stuff when compared to Europe or New Zealand or Australia or whatever. Sorry, I'm just reading my notes. Yeah, and this kind of language and this kind of like ideological thinking like kind of drives the way we kind of see the world and the way we relate to people, same as us, but who are different to us. So Stuart Hall, again, second quote by him, says that medias and technologies play a much more active role in the reproduction of our reality of ideology. In this quote, that representation is a very different notion from that of reflection. It implies the active work of selecting and presenting, structuring and shaping, and not merely transmitting an existing meaning, but the more active labor of making things mean. So the media, the mainstream media, our cultural institutions definitely play a role in this kind of ideological representation and creation. So in February, when Russia invaded Ukraine, the mainstream media was really quick to kind of like humanize this crisis, calling Ukraine like, how can this be happening in a civilized place? You know, these are all blonde-haired, blue-eyed people, these are Christians. And then in comparison to how they kind of report on Palestine and other wars and terrors happening somewhere else, they call it terrorists, you know, they call children human shields, they call ethnic cleansing conflicts. And this kind of like this isn't just them saying the media, like this then affects how governments see the refugees and how peoples of nations and stuff react to them and how they accept them or not accept them. So this is a film by an artist, Nicholas Carodi. The QR code's at the bottom. I would really suggest you give it a watch. It's really interesting. But he made a video about the use of binoculars by the Israeli state to kind of perpetuate the constant what's the word? It slipped my mind. But the taking of the Golan Heights, basically. So these binoculars, they kind of like a lot of government officials, army people, they engage in photo ops using these binoculars as a way of like constantly looking over the Golan Heights into like Gaza and stuff. And it's kind of like he explains it way more in the film, but it's basically a way, like a spectacle kind of, where people looking at these are constantly like on the top, like above Gaza, and it's like they're looking down on this land that they're trying to take and stuff. But I won't go too much into it. I just thought it was a really good piece of media, and I would suggest everyone watches it. So on to the main bit of my presentation on the politics of looking and the technology of spectatorship. During the British and European colonial rule of Africa, a lot of kind of collectors and photographers were sent over to colonize land to kind of take photos of subjects and document them in a way. But these kind of photos weren't just like, you know, holiday photos that you would take. It was more a way of sorting people out and kind of scientifically like categorizing them. And these make up a lot of the photographs that the British photographer Northcote Thomas took back then in the colonial era. And these photographs all kind of belong to a collection at SOAS University, along with many artifacts, as you can see in the middle there, taken, stolen from the lands while, you know, the British was in colonial rule. So definition of spectacle: a visually striking performance or display, an event or scene regarded in terms of its visual impact. On the left there is an image of some of the binoculars, like binocular photo ops taken in Israel as well. And in the middle is someone taking a photo of the artifacts taken by Northcote Thomas and given to SOAS. And on the right is a project that SOAS did where they took photos of these artifacts, took photos of these, put these photographs taken by Northcote Thomas into a binder, and they take it to the places where these photographs were historically taken. They take it back to modern day Nigeria or wherever else the photographs were taken from, and they show it to the natives there in these plastic binders, rather than returning the artifacts or returning, you know, the photographs to them. And then they take a picture of this event happening, the modern day people holding up, you know, the photos of their ancestors, photos of stolen artifacts from their land. And then they take this photo and they put it on their website, and it's kind of like they're done for the day, like they've achieved decolonization because they've, you know, somehow shared all this with the communities that were like historically, that violence was historically enacted upon. And yeah, I just call this a spectacle because institutions like SOAS kind of claim to be the pinnacle of decolonization, but you know, it's just kind of a spectacle of that. And kind of with the British Museum as well, where they have the largest kind of loot from the colonial era. And when these institutions like create these spectacles, they dehumanize the subjects of these images, one, but they also desensitize the viewer from that violence that the photos and the artifacts were actually taken from. And the viewer becomes so far removed from the spectacle because, you know, a picture like this is a picture of someone holding a picture of a history long, long ago. So by the time this image gets to the viewer, they're so far removed from that violent history that it becomes completely normal that they're standing in a place like the British Museum that has thousands and thousands of stolen history, stolen memories. And yeah, so this is all part of like the way that visual technology and language and ideology like affects us now. And although the colonial era is gone, like people aren't like, you know, colonizing everywhere, violence is still being enacted upon these subjects who are dead now, but also upon how we view the descendants of these places, people who come from here. In an increasing globalized world, in a post-colonial world, it's really important to like recognize these kind of technological processes, because that is kind of what they are. Like back to that Stuart Hall quote, it's not just showing things, like there is an active kind of, I'm so bad at what to say, guys, I'm sorry. But there's like an active decision somewhere in the back of everyone's mind that's like putting these things there, like it's removing the viewer from these things. And So that is why things like this, like these lectures I do, it's not really to like solve anything, but the more you know about things, the more you can like really question these ideological processes that happen in our head. And when it comes to, you know, media institutions and people who make policy, people who create media, it's really important to like have these things in the back of your mind so we don't like continue to fall into the same trap over and over again. And we can just like accept where we are, yes, and I'm not saying we have to fix everything, but in this kind of globalized world, like it's just much better to know what's going on in the back of everyone's mind. So I'll leave you all with this quote from Bell Hooks, and it says, "A look to document is a look of opposition." And to me, that quote really means like getting involved with these alternative media forms, stuff like my project and things, and really just looking at the processes and just, yeah, opposing them, but not opposing them, just explaining them and talking about it and just being clued up. I think that is true decolonization, not what SOAS does. So that's my speech for today. Thank you, everyone.
Annie, thank you very much indeed. One of the things which has been a topic right the way through this week is the metaverse being at the start of its journey, and who would have any say or control or any influence over where it will be going. And I have a funny feeling that most of the places that were the blanks on your map are more likely to end up trying to run the metaverse and trying to run all the technologies that are to come. And so I think you've had a very important voice here, and thank you for that. John, will you bug word?
Yeah, just sort of like something that when you showed the map, it reminded me of, I don't know if you've looked at any stuff to do with like alternative presentations of the world map.
Yes.
So there's one that I was reminded of, which was the Buckminster Fuller's Dymaxion map, which kind of orientates everything differently. I think these kind of things are really interesting, you know, in the way that our sort of traditional maps and things that are normally used are potentially kind of loaded with their own sets of biases and things. Yeah, just occurred to me as an area that might be interesting to explore.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, actually. Like the map that we use now purposefully shrinks Africa, and people say it's because, oh, there's no space in the map or whatever. But just that alone, if people knew kind of how big Africa was, it might change their thinking a bit with like, how did one small country manage to colonize so much of that place? Like if you saw it on the map in its small scale, you would just think differently. These again are the little pieces of technology that have been culturally and historically like drilled into our minds and like affects the way that we think about these moments in history and time. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for that. This was brilliant, but I do have one little problem. You talk about colonialism as if it's a thing of the past.
You're right, it's not.
So UK is shipping its waste to Indonesia, and when Indonesia said it was toxic, they had to return it back to the UK. They didn't have the means to process it. It was being dumped in the sea in Indonesia and burned. Now it's going to Pakistan, where it's being scattered around cities and dumped in the sea and burned. We don't hear about this. We hear about new technology and clean electric cars. Here's a new toy for you to play with. But there is, I think, still this systemic problem that exists. Just the fact that you do not have presence there doesn't necessarily mean that those countries aren't colonized anymore.
Yeah, of course. When I talk about colonialism, when I use that term, I just refer to it to that initial stage. Like, there is post-colonialism, there is neo-colonialism, and those kind of things happen in Africa as well. I mean, you've got the whole Rwanda thing, but in places like Kenya and Ghana, you have kind of companies, multinational companies going there and setting up base there, and they don't get permission to like use the water streams or stuff like that. What they do is they build their offices and they take the land right next to it and push the locals out and kind of infiltrate that water system to the point where the locals have to move. And now that land is available for them. You know, you've got China going into places like Nigeria and offering loads of money to them for them to like build these new technologies and build these new places. And again, putting them in more debt and making them more kind of like subservient and needed. Kind of, so that's just more examples of, yeah, this is a whole, there is neocolonialism going on, there is post-colonialism going on. So yeah, I completely agree with you. It's not over.
So thank you so much for that. It reminded me when I was at, actually it was the Geneva conference in Paris. And we were at the Musée du Quai de Branly. And do you know this museum? It's the largest museum for African collections. It's the entire museum. It's on a massive scale. And just at that very moment, I was sitting at a table with a few people and the director of the museum. And I had been in the collections photographing some of the things that really caught my eye. And there were these 3 almost life-size sculptures from Benin. They're really incredible. And the director said, I just got a call from Macron, president of France, and he said, we've got to give those back. He said, it was just at that moment, he was shocked because he said, no one asked me. And there had been a delegation from Benin, the president of Benin was there in Paris. And having been a museum curator myself, one issue that's used in this argument is the conservation issue. And what I learned at that time was that Benin was building a new museum to be able to house all these things that were going to be coming back, but that could, because even something as simple as temperature, you know, there's all these considerations, but this new movement is pretty spectacular. And the one thing that is encouraging, it's being done in a way where the things are being appreciated on a new level and being preserved properly. So when these things come back, whether it's from the British Museum or the Quai de Branly, they're going to be in their own museum of the country. Yeah, so that's kind of exciting.
Yeah. It's really interesting with this whole conservation issue when a lot of these sculptures existed in their natural homes for thousands of years before the colonial people came over and took that. So I just think it's really interesting that all of a sudden now a lot of these museums have these problems, like how would they stay, you know, are they safe? But they were safe there for a lot of time.
It depends what they're made of, really, what the
Yeah.
materials.
But they were made there, you know, and it's like a lot of people from Benin, unless the sculptures are returned, might not ever get a chance to see those sculptures. While us here